everything you think you know about Jesus might be wrong. For centuries, Western art has portrayed him as pale-skinned and European-looking, flowing light brown hair, blue eyes, fair skin. This image hangs in churches across the world. It's printed on prayer cards, painted on church walls, etched into stained glass windows. It's the Jesus that billions of people picture when they pray. But here's the truth. The historical Jesus was a brown-skinned Middle Eastern man from 1st century Palestine. He looked nothing like the European paintings we've come to accept as reality. Today, we're uncovering this fascinating story using forensic reconstructions created by British medical artist Dr. Richard Neve and his team, who used computerized tomography scans of 1st century Semitic skulls from Jerusalem to create what scientists believe is the most accurate representation of what Jesus actually looked like. And let me tell you, the difference is shocking. The forensic reconstruction shows a man with olive to dark skin, short dark curly hair, dark eyes, a bushy beard, and a wide face, features typical of Galilean Semites of his era. Based on skeletal remains from the region and time period, Jesus would have been about 5 feet 5 inches tall, the average height for men in that area, with a muscular build from working as a carpenter. This is dramatically different from the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 6-foot-tall European Jesus we see everywhere. So today, we're going on a journey. We're going to trace how Christianity, which began as a Middle Eastern faith among brown-skinned Jewish people, transformed into a religion dominated by European imagery. We'll explore the vibrant deserts of Judea, follow the faith through the Roman Empire, witness the Renaissance transformation, and see how colonialism spread a white Jesus to every corner of the globe. How did this transformation happen? Why does it matter? And what can it teach us about history, culture, power, and the dangerous consequences of remaking God in our own image? Let's dive in. Let's start with the facts. What did Jesus actually look like? The truth is, the New Testament never describes Jesus's physical appearance. Not once. We have no drawings from his lifetime, no sculptures, no photographs. Obviously, the earliest Christians didn't create images of Jesus because their Jewish heritage prohibited graven images. The Second Commandment explicitly forbade making representations of God or holy figures. In the first few centuries of Christianity, Jesus was represented symbolically, as a fish, a lamb, an anchor, or a simple monogram. When figurative representations did appear, Jesus was often portrayed as a young, beardless shepherd based on Greco-Roman imagery of Orpheus and Apollo. But as Christianity spread and evolved, artists began creating more detailed representations. And here's where geography, culture, and politics shaped how Jesus looked. Dr. Richard Neve, a British forensic anthropologist who had previously reconstructed the faces of historical figures like Philip II of Macedonia and King Midas, applied modern forensic techniques to answer the question, what did Jesus really look like? Neve's team acquired 3 Semitic skulls from 1st century Jerusalem, the region where Jesus lived and preached. Using computerized tomography, they created detailed X-ray slices of the skulls. Specialized computer programs then determined where soft tissue would have been, building up the muscles and skin layer by layer. The process is the same one police use to solve crimes: forensic facial reconstruction based on skeletal structure, anthropological data, and knowledge of regional populations. The team used clay matching the thickness of facial tissues specified by the computer program, then modeled the nose, lips, and eyelids according to the underlying muscle structure. For hair, eye color, and skin tone, the researchers couldn't use the skulls alone. Instead, they studied 1st century artwork, literary references, and the Bible itself, based on Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians, which state that, if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him. They determined Jesus probably had short, dark, curly hair. Jewish tradition at the time dictated wearing a beard, so that was included as well. As for skin color, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew living in Galilee. Scholar Joan Taylor, professor of early Christianity at King's College London, describes Jesus as having olive brown skin. The the same skin tone as other people in that region and time period. The team also hypothesized that Jesus, working as a carpenter and traveling extensively outdoors, would have had a muscular frame and deeply tanned skin from sun exposure. The resulting image? A man with tan, olive-toned skin, dark curly hair cropped close to his head, dark eyes, and a short beard. A wide face, rugged features. A working-class Jewish man from first-century Palestine. Not European, not white, not even close. Dr. Neve emphasized that his reconstruction represents a typical adult man who lived in the same place and time as Jesus. Not Jesus specifically, since no skeletal remains of Jesus exist, but it's the most scientifically accurate representation we have of what a Galilean Jewish man of that era would have looked like. And it looks nothing like the Jesus hanging in Western churches. So how did we get from a brown-skinned Middle Eastern Jew to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed European Jesus that dominates Christian imagery today? The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, over centuries, shaped by culture, politics, art, and power. In the earliest Christian art, found in the catacombs of Rome from the late 2nd to early 4th centuries, Jesus was depicted in various ways, sometimes as a young, beardless shepherd, sometimes stocky and short-haired, sometimes with longer hair and a beard. These early images varied widely because there was no standardized appearance yet. Early Christians often used syncretism, meaning they combined visual formats from other cultures. The image of Christ as the Good Shepherd was based on pagan representations of Orpheus, Hermes, and Apollo. Christ wearing a toga borrowed from depictions of Roman emperors. The mature, bearded Christ combined characteristics of the Greek god Zeus and the Old Testament figure Samson. But these early images still reflected Mediterranean and Middle Eastern features. Darker skin, dark hair, features common to the region. The major shift began with Constantine. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan. In 380 CE, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. This was a seismic change. Christianity went from a persecuted minority faith to the state religion of the most powerful empire on earth. Constantine founded Constantinople as the new imperial capital, and art began to honor emperors, Christ, and the Virgin Mary in a distinctly Byzantine style. Christianity became intertwined with imperial power, and Christian art became grander, more formal, and more politically charged. As Christianity spread through Europe, artists began depicting Jesus in ways that reflected their own cultures. European artists painted Jesus using European models, their friends, family, patrons. This wasn't necessarily malicious. Artists throughout history have depicted religious figures in familiar, relatable ways. But something else was happening too. During the 8th and 9th centuries in Europe, theologians obsessed with the symbolism of the Passion began ascribing blame for Jesus' death to the Jews. In Christian art, Judas, King Herod, and eventually Pontius Pilate came to be represented in dark, sinister hues while Jesus became increasingly white and luminous. Colm Hourihane, director of the Index of Christian Art at Princeton University, explains, "The oldest basis of all Christian art is the clash of good versus evil, light versus dark. This was particularly the case in the 9th and 10th centuries, when the Jews assumed a dark coloration in art while Christ became radiantly white, illuminated. Whiteness became associated with purity, holiness, and divinity. Darkness became associated with sin, evil, and those who rejected Christ. This color symbolism had devastating consequences. It fueled anti-Semitism and would later justify racism and colonialism. By the Renaissance, the 14th through 17th centuries, European artists had fully established Jesus as European in appearance. Some of the most famous depictions of Christ, from Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper to Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, showed Jesus as distinctly European. In The Creation of Adam, Michelangelo painted God himself as a white man with a beard, an image so powerful that we now have to explicitly say God is not a white man to counter it. Renaissance artists began combining the icon and the portrait, making Christ in their own likeness. They identified with the human suffering of Christ and projected their own features onto him. But this wasn't just about art. It was about power. Artists in Renaissance Italy actively tried to distance Jesus and his family from their Jewishness. Anti-Semitic myths were already prevalent. Even small details mattered. Pierced ears were associated with Jewish women, and their absence in paintings represented a transition toward Christianity. Later, anti-Semitic forces in Europe, including the Nazis, would attempt to completely divorce Jesus from his Judaism in favor of an Aryan stereotype. With the Renaissance in full swing, white Jesus became firmly entrenched in the European consciousness, and this was the image that would be exported to the entire world. European colonization changed everything. As European powers, Spain, Portugal, England, France, the Netherlands, conquered lands across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they brought Christianity with them, and they brought their white Jesus. Jesuit missionaries established painting schools in colonized territories that taught new converts Christian art in a European mode. Indigenous and colonized peoples were taught that Jesus looked like their European colonizers. White Christians were moving aggressively across the globe, colonizing and converting as they went, and they brought images of a white Jesus with them. This European depiction even ricocheted back into the Middle East, where Christianity has its roots. Think about the profound psychological impact of this. Colonized people were told that their Savior, the Son of God, looked like the very people who were enslaving them, stealing their land, and destroying their cultures. The doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, and American exceptionalism all aligned perfectly with the image of a white Jesus. European Christians used the white Jesus to justify their colonial missions. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The white man was the savior of the world. White Jesus became firmly entrenched not just in Europe but in every European colony. This is the image that made its way to the New World, taking root along with the first seeds of American culture. And in the 20th century, white Jesus reached his ultimate expression in the work of Warner Sallman, an American commercial artist. In 1940, Sallman painted The Head of Christ, a light-eyed, light-haired, European-looking Jesus. Through partnerships with Protestant and Catholic publishing companies, this image was mass-produced and distributed worldwide. More than 500 million copies have been printed. Diane Apostolos Capodona, professor of religious art at Georgetown University, notes, "It's the image of Jesus that every American soldier took with them to World War II." Sallman's Jesus became the dominant image of Christ in the 20th century, despite being completely historically inaccurate. Now, here's an important question. Does it matter what Jesus looked like? Some people argue it doesn't. They say Christianity is about faith, not physical appearance. Jesus' message transcends race and ethnicity. God sees the heart, not the skin. And there's truth to that. Christianity has always been meant to be universal, crossing all boundaries of race, nation, and culture. But representation matters. Images matter, and the consequences of whitening Jesus have been devastating. First, it erases historical truth. Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. That's a historical fact, not a theological opinion. When we depict him as European, we're rewriting history to fit our preferences. Second, it has been used to justify racism, colonialism, and white supremacy. If God himself is white, if the savior of humanity is white, it's easy to conclude that white people are superior. This logic has been used explicitly to justify slavery, colonization, and racial violence. Activists have noted that the Jesus you saw in all the Black Baptist churches looks like the people who were beating you up in the streets or setting dogs on you. Imagine worshiping a savior who looks like your oppressor. Third, it alienates people of color from Christianity. When every image of Jesus, Mary, the disciples, and the angels looks white and European, It sends a message about who Christianity is for and who belongs. Fourth, it's a form of idolatry. We've remade God in our own image rather than acknowledging that all humans are made in God's image. We've prioritized cultural comfort over truth. Now, to be fair, Jesus has been depicted in many different ways across cultures and time periods. Carlos F. Cardozo-Orlandi, associate professor of world Christianity at Columbia Theological Seminary, observes, while Western imagery is dominant, in other parts of the world Jesus is often shown as Black, Arab, or Hispanic. In Ethiopia, Jesus has been portrayed as Black for centuries. In Korea, artist Kim Ki-chong depicted Jesus in traditional Korean dress. In China, Jesus appears in Chinese art with Asian features. Artist Robert Lentz has created images of Black Jesus. Sophia Minson, a New Zealand artist, created Jesus with a traditional Maori face tattoo. These culturally specific depictions make sense. They help communities see themselves in the story of Jesus and feel included in Christianity's message. The problem isn't that European Christians depicted Jesus as European. The problem is that European Christianity became dominant through colonialism and presented its version of Jesus as the only correct, universal, historical version, erasing Jesus's actual Middle Eastern, Jewish identity in the process. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we need to acknowledge the truth. Jesus was not white. He was a brown-skinned Middle Eastern Jew. That's not controversial. It's historical fact based on where and when he lived. Second, we need to understand how and why Jesus was whitened, not as some innocent artistic choice, but as part of larger systems of power, colonialism, and racism. Third, we need to question whose interests are served by maintaining white Jesus imagery. Why are some Christians so resistant to more historically accurate depictions? What are they afraid of losing? Fourth, we should embrace diverse representations of Jesus that reflect the global, multicultural reality of Christianity while also honoring historical truth. Fifth, and most importantly, we need to examine how the image of God we hold in our minds shapes our understanding of whose lives matter, who belongs, and what God cares about. If we only picture God and Jesus as white, we unconsciously associate divinity, purity, and goodness with whiteness, and that has consequences in how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we structure society. Christianity began as a Middle Eastern faith. Jesus was a Jewish man who spoke Aramaic, lived under Roman occupation, experienced poverty and marginalization, and was executed by the state as a political subversive. The early church was diverse: Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free people, people from across the Roman Empire and beyond. Christianity spread through Africa, Asia, and Europe simultaneously. But European Christianity, backed by imperial power and colonial expansion, came to dominate. And with that domination came the erasure of Christianity's actual origins and the remaking of Jesus in Europe's image. Scholar Anna Swartwood-House notes the profound historical irony. The image of a light-skinned European Christ began to influence other parts of the world through European trade and colonization, even though Christianity itself originated outside Europe. We need to reclaim the truth. Christianity is not a white religion. It never was. Jesus was not European. The faith began in the Middle East, spread through Africa and Asia as much as through Europe, and today is growing fastest in the global South, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The future of Christianity is brown, Black, Asian, and indigenous. The center of global Christianity has already shifted away from Europe and North America. So perhaps it's time for our images of Jesus to reflect that reality, not as a trendy multicultural gesture, but as a return to historical truth and a rejection of the colonial project that whitened Jesus in the first place. Let me be clear. This isn't about hating white people or attacking European Christianity. This is about truth. This is about acknowledging how power shapes representation. This is about recognizing that when we remake God in our own image, we commit idolatry. Joan Taylor writes in her book, "What Did Jesus Look Like?" Everyone can imagine what Jesus looked like. We have the image of Jesus everywhere. It's a global image. It's a phenomenon. So we think we can recognize him. We don't even have to work at it. But that image is wrong, and it's time we admitted it. The historical Jesus, the real Jesus, was a brown-skinned, Middle Eastern Jewish man who lived, worked, suffered, and died in Palestine 2,000 years ago. He didn't look like the paintings in European cathedrals. He didn't look like Warner Salmon's Head of Christ. He didn't have flowing blonde hair or blue eyes or fair skin. Forensic reconstruction suggests he was about 5 feet 1 inch tall, around 110 pounds, average for men in his region and time, with short, dark curly hair, a beard, olive brown skin, and a face typical of Galilean Semites. That's the Jesus of history. That's who Christians claim to follow. So why do we keep picturing someone else? The answer is uncomfortable. Because centuries of power, politics, colonialism, racism, and self-interest have shaped Christianity's imagery to serve particular purposes. The white Jesus was useful to European empires. He justified conquest. He made Christianity look like a European religion meant to civilize the savage world. But that project is over. The colonial era has ended. We live in a global, multicultural world where Christianity is increasingly non-Western. And in that world, clinging to white Jesus isn't just historically inaccurate. It's a choice to perpetuate a colonial lie. We can do better. We can tell the truth. We can honor the actual history of Christianity and the actual identity of Jesus. Not because it's politically correct, not because it's trendy, but because truth matters, because representation matters, because we worship a God of truth, and truth-telling is an act of faithfulness. When Christianity became white, it lost something essential. It lost its roots. It lost its connection to the actual historical Jesus. It became a tool of empire rather than a faith for the marginalized. Reclaiming Jesus' true identity, as a Middle Eastern, Jewish, brown-skinned man, is about more than correcting the historical record. It's about recovering Christianity's soul. If this video opened your eyes, share it. If you're struggling with these revelations, that's okay. Sit with that discomfort. If you want to learn more, dive into the scholarship. Read Joan Taylor's work. Look at the forensic reconstructions. Study early Christian art before European dominance. And most importantly, ask yourself, what does it mean that I've been picturing Jesus wrong my entire life? What else might I have gotten wrong? And what changes when I start seeing Jesus and God more truthfully? Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.